This is the megacity dilemma, the inequality problem nobody likes to talk about, by Economics Explained.
Japan is the third largest national economy in the world today, which is especially impressive when you consider that it has been in a state of stagnation for 3.5 decades, not seeing sustained growth since the early 1990s. But
yeah, the 80s was the golden era, right? Like the big boom, and then it kind of never was like that again.
The fate of the wider Japanese economy lies in stark contrast to its capital, Tokyo, the largest and most economically powerful city in the world. And this diversion is perhaps the most obvious example of a real economic problem that all advanced economies are quietly struggling with. Tokyo is home to more than 37 million people and has a GDP of over $2 trillion. If just this city was its own country, it would be the 8th largest in the world, ranking ahead of Italy and falling just behind Canada. This depends a lot on where you draw Tokyo's borders, because as the city has developed, it has massively outgrown its official prefecture and has slowly morphed with other nearby metropolitan centres like Chiba, Gunma, Kanagawa and Yokohama to form what most people now collectively call the Tokyo Major Metropolitan Area or the Kanto Major Metropolitan Area. No matter how it's defined for the sake of figures, the outcome is still clear. Japan is becoming a two-speed economy, with people in one city surging ahead of everybody else in rural areas and smaller regional centres. Japan and Tokyo...
I mean, yeah, I guess obviously it's getting there, but this is like that in many countries now. I was watching the Cursed Tegad video recently about South Korea, right? And this is literally what he was saying. That video was saying, like, obviously with a lot of the way the world is going, the declining birth rate and everything, and just the way the big cities are becoming, like, you know, if you really want to, you know, for your job, your life, and different things, like most people move to the big cities, and you know, the countryside is slowly dying, both in different economies and just in people just not living there anymore, right? I guess that's what happens. I mean, I've always kind of lived in the countryside of France myself, and I don't know if I ever got that impression of like things were really dying per se. I used to live in the south of France, where, you know, there was a lot of like agriculture. We had vineyard, we had, you know, ton of like stuff like apple trees and olive trees and all that. So it was mostly like, you know, agriculture over there, but yeah, it was like you had to go far enough to get like a big store or something, but it didn't feel like that bad. I mean, isn't it how it's always been in history? Like, there's big cities where things are great and, you know, everybody like goes, and then there's like the countryside where, you know, things are not going at the same pace, but you kind of need the countryside.
May be the most obvious examples, but this is happening everywhere, and there's a good chance that it's only going to become worse in the next decade. The inequality between regional areas and certain select cities could become one of the strongest forces against sustained economic growth, just like it has been in Japan. Beyond just headline GDP figures, it can also cause a lot of social issues, where people feel they are forced into overcrowded, expensive cities where they'll live in tiny apartments just to stay in the part of the economy that is doing well. Of course, some people like the lifestyle of living in bustling metropolises, but this regional inequality is hurting them too. So, why is inequality between big cities and rural areas such a problem for the entire economy?
Explain.
Why is this even happening? There is more to it than you might think. And finally, what can be done to fix these problems? After we've done all of that, we can put Tokyo on the less and less relevantly named Economics Explained national leaderboard. Different regions having different levels of income is not a problem for the broader economy by itself. Certain areas are more expensive to live in than others and are home to industries that maximise productivity from workers. If people are getting paid more but spending more for the same quality of goods and services, then it sort of works itself out. In theory, at least. Economists will often adjust output figures using something called purchasing power parity to account for this discrepancy. For an extremely oversimplified example, assume that two economies both produce nothing but wheat, and they both produce 1 million tonnes of wheat every year and have the same population. The first economy sells its wheat for $400 a tonne, and each individual worker in this economy earns $10,000 a year. The second economy is more expensive. It sells its wheat for $600 a tonne and pays its workers $15,000 a year to compensate them for the high prices that they'll pay for their theoretical economy's single output. Economy 1 would have a nominal GDP of $400 million, and Economy 2 would have a nominal GDP of $600 million. But which one is the bigger, wealthier, or more prosperous economy? They are both producing exactly the same amount of exactly the same good, and each worker can afford the same amount of that good for the money that they are paid every year. So, adjusted for purchasing power parity, these economies would both have the same GDP. Making this adjustment in the real world is a lot more difficult because, of course, Economies produce more than one simple commodity.
Yeah, I'm a bit lost by what he was explaining there. I mean, as always, bear with me, especially when it comes to math. I mean, one number is bigger than the other. Like, one group is getting paid 15,000, so they have way more money to spend. No? So then, is that not the bigger one? How does the number end up the same? I don't know.
And they also use different currencies. Real purchasing power parity figures are made using consumer price index figures, with the USA as a baseline. If the average cost of goods and services in an economy is cheaper than in the USA, then its GDP will be adjusted up for purchasing power parity. China's nominal GDP, as reported by the World Bank in 2021, was $17.7 trillion. But because most goods and services in China are cheaper than in the USA, they get a lot more stuff for that $17.7 trillion. Their total output, adjusted for purchasing power parity, was $27.3 trillion in the same year. If the average cost of goods and services in an economy is higher than it is in the USA, then GDP purchasing power parity will be adjusted down. The USA is a remarkably wealthy and productive country, so not many economies have their GDPs adjusted down for purchasing power parity, apart from places like Switzerland and Luxembourg. Now, adjusting economic figures to measure the true output of an economy, not just how expensive things are in that economy, is an important thing to be able to do, because at the end of the day, economics is about providing things of value to the people. But it's not always as simple as this. Most GDP figures that economists will work with, especially if they're involved in international macroeconomics, will be unadjusted or nominal figures. Now, that's not because they're too lazy to make the purchasing power parity adjustments, it's because outright figures are more useful when economies interact with one another. Our week-based...
I ain't gonna lie, you guys really like to share videos about the economy, and like, they really make me feel stupid. I don't think I follow. Like, it's like, so far I'm kind of lost. I guess it's a lot of like the big terms and just the logic of these terms and what they do. Like, it's kind of beyond me. It's a little bit beyond me. I not really want to get economics much. With the anime, yeah, fair enough. You can't eat money. I mean, fair enough, yeah. Hello, Ivan. Another economy video. Too much economy.
Economies from earlier would start to run into some difficulties if they ever wanted to trade with one another, or if people wanted to move between these two regions. Nobody would want to buy wheat at $600 a tonne when they could get it from the economy selling it for $400 a tonne. And if someone wanted to move from the economy where they...
I guess that's the point right here. Yeah, that's what he meant. Huh? Like, I guess the right side is getting like much more money. They're getting paid much more than the others. But because they live in a big city, everything is insanely expensive. So it might even out in the end. Like, they're making more money, but they're spending more to buy the same thing as like the countryside people. So in the end, it evens out. Okay, I think I get the concept now. Banana language, okay.
Are earning $15,000 a year, they could buy a house 50% nicer in the economy where everybody earns an average of $10,000 a year. If these two countries are sovereign nations, then there are some barriers to that happening, like tariffs or taxes on imports and exports and immigration control stopping people from moving between countries. But if these economies were just different regions of the same nation, then almost all of those barriers are removed. Large cities like Tokyo are home to jobs that on average pay more than jobs in rural areas and smaller centres. Because when we're talking about inequality between major cities and everywhere else, we're not just talking about farms and the outback, we're also talking about smaller cities and towns that could still be home to 1 million people. Now, people earn more in these megacities, but it's also a more expensive place to live. However, that only means that residents can buy more of the goods and services in the country that are not region-specific. A car doesn't cost more just because it's purchased in the middle of the city, and other expenses apart from housing are less inflated than salaries. The problem this causes for the wider economy is that it becomes very hard to move into Tokyo or any of the other major cities around the world unless you already live there. It also disincentivizes people to move out of cities because it can become really hard to move back in, which only heightens affordability problems.
Yeah, I guess if you come from the countryside, you have to first save up to literally like move to the city. And I guess the only logical thing would be like you're moving because you already got a job over there, right? And then once you're over there, like make up for what you spent from getting there, right? Yeah. It's kind of a mess.
My own home city of Sydney is a really expensive place to live, and I could probably buy a much nicer house if I moved a few hours out to a smaller coastal town. I can do my job from anywhere with an internet connection, so there is no need for me to stay here, but I do. A big reason for my economically illogical decision is that if I ever wanted to move back to Sydney, I might not be able to afford it if house prices here increase faster than house prices everywhere else. Now, obviously, I'll be fine, but I am taking up a house that could be given to someone that actually needs to live in a major city because that's where their job is. Big cities full of smart people, schools, and companies are the primary drivers of innovation. Being able to share talent and ideas is much easier when people are closer together. If people can't afford to move into these areas or are not willing to make the lifestyle sacrifices necessary to live there, then the entire national or even global economy could suffer from the innovations that weren't made. The inequality between cities and rural areas will also accelerate another problem that most advanced economies are facing: their aging populations. Cities are great places to promote the technical innovation that will drive the long.
Okay, but once again, I mean, he hasn't addressed it yet, and I'm sure he might get into it, but yeah, like, how is that very different from, like, how it's been throughout history, right? I mean, for most of history, in most countries, I assume it's been like that. The big cities are doing much better than, than everybody else. And obviously, much better doesn't mean that everybody is doing better, right? The big cities also have, like, a lot more poverty because there's a ton of people who live there, despite the fact that they just can't afford to, right? That's pretty common. Like in France, Paris is very well known for that. Like, Paris' reputation is literally like, the people out there are kind of like asshole because, they work like insane to pay like 4,000 rents a month or something for like, like one room or something. It's kind of like the meme in France that Paris is just kind of insane for like the renting price and stuff like that. I mean, I've watched many little documentaries around there, like, like at some point there's some company that literally started doing like some kind of container, like the containers that go onto ship to transport stuff. Like they started buying containers and making them as like little home, and it was still like an insane amount of money because it's still in Paris itself, right? Even though it's literally just a container. So again, hasn't it always been like that? I mean, the big cities, have always been like that. I feel like, I don't know.
Run growth of the global economy, but they're normally not ideal places to have children. Birth rates in major cities around the world are significantly lower than in rural areas of the same countries. A lot of people will move out of major cities when they want to start a family because buying a house big enough to raise children in these regions is just unbelievably expensive. People still do it, but it normally means living in cramped conditions, which is not ideal for the parents or the children. Moving just outside of the city into surrounding suburban regions where workers can commute back in to take part in the highly value-adding industries that major cities are home to is one option. But this causes what city planners call urban sprawl, where low-density housing grows in a wider and wider radius around a city centre, which demands exponentially more transport infrastructure and longer travel times. Eventually, family homes within a reasonable distance of a city become just as expensive as appropriately sized family homes in the city itself. This leaves a growing share of the population having to make a tough choice between leaving a city and the opportunities it offers to start a family, making big quality of life sacrifices to raise a family, or finally choosing not to start a family at all.
Which then leads to the population decline problem. Here we go, South Korea again. All of this feels like it links a lot to that Kurskegad video about South Korea that I didn't react to, but I watched, and I did react to Work Terrorists Work Good. He did like a reply to that. I reacted to that.
This year in our videos on South Korea, France, Macau, Hong Kong and the EU, we've had to speak about the importance of young workers entering the workforce to replace a growing number of older workers who are now retiring. Declining birth rates in advanced economies don't just happen because people get richer, they happen because richer economies tend to be those more focused around cities, and cities are difficult and expensive places to raise children. Beyond just the macroeconomics of this issue and the impact it will have on long-term growth, it has a very real human cost. Most people would choose to start a family if it was economically viable, but it's not in a lot of large cities, and because of the inequality between these cities and rural areas, it's not economically viable to live anywhere else for a lot of people either. So, if aging populations are such an economic threat and slowing innovation could cost the global economy trillions, and both of these issues can be traced back to the problem of inequality between major cities and everywhere else, can the inequality be fixed? There are always going to be industries that pay more and places that are more desirable to live than others. No sensible policy is going to be able to change this reality without doing more damage to the economy than they fix. But these two do not need to be linked. Today more than ever, there is less need for a lot of workers to be physically located in the same city or even the same country as where they work. Creating policies that encourage people to work remotely and
But that's something that's like easier said than done. I feel like though, within a few decades, with the newer generation who have grown up with, like since they were kids using computers and technology and actually fully embracing and understanding the concept of like working from just your computer somewhere else, it might become more of a thing. But I think we saw that recently, you know, like in France it's a thing, and I've seen in the US it was a big thing as well. Where like during COVID, you know, a lot of people got used to working from home, but you know, a lot of the boss, which are like older people, they hated that, right? Obviously, they feel like, you know, their workers are doing less work or something. So the second, you know, the restriction ended, a lot of company, maybe not everybody, but like 90% at least, decided to go back to the old way of, you know, everybody comes in the office or something. And, you know, in a way it's stupid because as we know, for people who do job like office work and stuff like that, you know, there's often a lot of time where like they waste time anyway being there, right? So they might actually literally be as efficient, if not more, from home. But again, like it's the mentality of some of the people who, you know, like they're older, and when they grow up, that's how you do it. So yeah, maybe in the next few decades, when most of these people are gone and replaced by, you know, people who grew up in this more modern age, maybe yeah, it might be more common for people and companies to just like operate like that. It might be. It might be, yeah. Yeah, I would say so. But also, as always, talking about stuff like that always forgets like the way the world is going right now. Like if you think with AI, for example, I mean, all of the problem that they're talking about right now relating to jobs and all that, I mean, how is it going to look in 20, 30 years with AI? I mean, will we have stopped and be reasonable about AI? Or will it have actually been, you know, going the way that some people think, where like, you know, many companies will just want to replace their workers with AI because, you know, much cheaper, much better, and all that. So then, you know, a lot of like the question right here and the debate might just not even matter because things will be very different. That's the question.
Companies to offer it as an option will reduce the demand for housing around areas of concentrated industry. It will also reduce demand for transport infrastructure if less people need to physically move in and out of a city centre every day. One potentially negative short-term side effect of this will be that it will increase demand for housing in regional areas. In the short term, this will create social issues as workers moving from higher income cities will drive up the prices of everything in the places they move into. This can create the same kind of housing unaffordability issues that economists were trying to solve by getting people out of concentrated metropolises in the first place. Real estate prices trickle down into the price of a lot of other goods and services as well. If a restaurant needs to pay twice as much rent, they're going to pass that expense along to their customers. But on a macroeconomic level, in the long term, this could actually be a good thing. If the price level of goods and services is reduced in megacities and increased everywhere else, then it will reduce the gap between these two economic regions and increase social mobility for people who want to move back in or out. Another thing policymakers can do to reduce the impact of this economic trend is to build out high quality but high density housing around these megacities. Increasing the supply of housing will reduce its costs, and if these areas are managed well, they can become more suitable for families, alleviating the birth rate issue which comes with city-focused advanced economies. This all sounds too good to be true, though. Unfortunately, these solutions are nothing new. Most economists dealing with these problems know that encouraging remote work and affordable housing developments will alleviate the problems caused by regional inequality, but enacting these policies is much easier said than done. People like the idea.
I would say like the problem is simply, well, one of the problems is probably simply that, yeah, like, you know, many of the big country problem, the solution, like people would want a solution that doesn't really like, that fixes this thing without really doing any big damage to something else. But like in this case, another case, the thing that might, you know, stop people, government, politicians from doing it is, yeah, the fact that, you know, you might need to hurt before fixing things, right? Like whatever decision you make might need to cause some more trouble and some hurt for gain that might only happen like way later, right? I mean, we're talking about stuff that, you know, right here, like are pretty big, and it might take decades to have a result from big decision that might cause problem for a while until they actually improve things. So most people are not really like that willing to make that decision, you know, to trust in the process and in the potential results like decades down the line.
Of affordable housing until it's their houses becoming affordable, and local residents will almost without fail push back against rezoning and high-density developments in the desirable areas close to cities. All the same, local governments welcoming in cashed-up residents from major cities are also going to have a lot of explaining to do to their voters when they feel like they are getting priced out of their own home. These are difficult steps to take, and nobody really wants to take them.
That's the thing.
Eventually we will need to, or else metropolises that have been the driving force of economic growth all over the world will slowly turn into dead weight holding that growth back. Okay, another one just for fun. Tokyo is the largest city in the world, and its local economy exceeds all but the largest nations in the world. So let's see where it sits on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Starting as always with size, estimates vary quite a bit about Tokyo's true output because it's much harder to measure things like imports and exports in a city where there are no formal controls about what is brought in and out like there is when goods enter a country. It also depends on where you draw the increasingly blurry borders of Tokyo City itself.
Right, yeah.
Best estimates from reputable organizations place it between 1.5 and 2.2 trillion US dollars, which would make it one of the largest national economies in the world if it became a sovereign state. One city accounts for 2.2% of the world's total output. Tokyo gets an 8 out of 10. GDP per capita is also very impressive, since, as we've seen in this video, megacities like Tokyo are home to highly productive industries. Output per person is roughly $60,000 per year in this sprawling metropolis, which is 50% higher than the national average, even when including the less productive fringes of the city. That still places Tokyo behind the national average of the USA, but that is a remarkably high benchmark, so the city gets an 8 out of 10. Stability and confidence is quite high. When people think of business centres of Asia, they think of Singapore, Hong Kong and Tokyo.
Sure.
And maybe less so Hong Kong these days. Tokyo might be a long way from its peak of crazy speculation in the 80s and 90s, but the new slow and steady approach has actually made it a more stable economy overall. It gets an 8 out of 10. Growth is really hard to measure because not many organisations track the output of cities, and even fewer do it over time when accounting for changing populations and borders. The best estimates that we could piece together from OECD and visual capitalist figures was a growth rate of around 3%. Which is perfectly average for an advanced economy of this size, and especially impressive when taken in the context of the stagnated Japanese economy as a whole. Tokyo gets a 5 out of 10. Finally, industry. Tokyo is home to world-leading companies, a huge talent pool of labour, and combines all of this with a good reputation for producing high-quality goods and services and conducting business openly and honestly. Tokyo as a country would be impressive in this category. As a city, it's simply mind-blowing, and gets an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
Altogether, that gives Tokyo an average score of 7.4 out of 10, putting it just behind its home country on the leaderboard. Check out the video linked on screen next, or if you prefer to listen to these videos, we make all of them as well as full interviews.
I mean, yeah, pretty interesting video, and I really thought about it as a problem because, again, I feel like, again, when you think about it, like, in all of history, that's how it's been, right? You know, nice to meet you. You know, like, most country, like, they have the big cities, we do way better than the rest of the country, but at the same time, because they do way better, they also, like, cause a lot of problem, right? I mean, to live there, you need to make a crazy amount of money, to buy, like, you know, whatever apartment you can find in your city, and it ends up being, like, something super small, right? I was talking about Paris, but I think Tokyo is, like, known to be even worse than that. Like, there's this channel I follow at Tokyo Lens, which sometimes does video about, like, crazy expensive, tiny Tokyo apartments, which is, like, sometimes, you know, like, literally, like, just a room, but, like, it's more like a corridor, right? And that's literally the apartment. And it's still, like, you know, a pretty crazy amount of money, right? First time, yeah. Nice to meet you again. Hope you enjoy your stay. So, yeah. You know, this kind of feels like another doomed kind of thing. It's kind of like some of the other, like, big world problem. Like, he explains some of the solution that could be, but I feel like it's not gonna happen, right? I mean, if there is ever any solution implemented, it's really when we've reached a point of, like, something collapsing or, like, some very big incident, right? Like, things may be looking like they're going a certain direction right now, but as long as there's not really, like, something massive to like, really force the government or something to do something about the issue, things aren't gonna change, I think. It's really what I think. But still, pretty interesting video. I mean, I got a bit confused early on, but I think I catched up later on. Constant flow of people from the rural area. I mean, yeah, but at the same time, then it's the rural area that start dying, right? It's already, like, a problem enough in a lot of country, right? Yeah, the baseball video opened. I'll check it out. No worry. I have it somewhere. You know, like, in a lot of country, there's already a problem of, like, too many people leaving the countryside. And so, you know, there's a lot less people, like, in stuff like agriculture and stuff like that, right? So if more of that happens, then it's a problem, yeah. I mean, they reproduce faster. Yeah, that's the other problem, right? Like the declining birth rates, it is happening like in like most of the countries, right? And so, yeah. I mean, this video is just like one problem of the 10,000 problem that there is going on, right? And all of them have some way that they interlock. So like you can't just fix one thing. There's like a bunch of things you need to fix. And that's why like it seems just like it's doomed, right? I mean, there's too many things that would need drastic change. And, you know, except if you have like a government that, you know, like is really motivated to actually like do change that people might not be happy about, then yeah, we're kind of stuck. We're kind of stuck. I guess that's how it is, yeah. So very interesting. Very interesting. Good video. Never watched this channel, but I like it.